want to put your dotting tool in there until you get it covered. And you want to do sort of perpendicular to your project. Here's my center. I'm just going to put that just like that. And if it didn't cover it as well as I wanted it to, I do it again. And in between each time, you wipe off your dotting tool. So I have this tool right here. I'm going to use white. And what I'm going to do is put the paint on your tool. And I have my markings. I'm going to do north, south, and you dip it in the paint between each dot. East, west. And I'm going to put 2 in between there, so I just sort of eye it to get my spacing right. Okay, I have my dots all the way around. Now I'm going to use a little larger dot for the next one. So you can line up your dots and see which one's a little bit larger. I have a couple of different tool kits. So I'm going to use, this one's one that I have. It's more expensive than this one. It says numbers for each end. So this is kind of nice. You have your gradations. So I'm going to use a different color. I'm going to use the green. And I put the dot. This dot is going to go in between the other dots. And you just take your time. You know, when you start doing this, you lose track of time, which is kind of nice. It's so soothing. In between each dot, I put one of these larger dots. There we go. So I did that size. I'm going to use, this was a 5. I'm going to use the next size up, which is a 6. I like these tools. Unfortunately, they don't have the number on it, so you can't keep track of what number you used last. Let me see. I want to use a different color. I'm going to use purple. I hate to waste paint, so I have these in here, and after I'm done with them, I'll put a wet paper towel on it and put it inside of a plastic Ziploc bag, put it in the refrigerator. I don't know if putting it in the refrigerator helps or not, but it seems to. So now that I have that, I'm going to go with a little larger size. You dip your tool until you get the end covered, and you don't press hard on your canvas. It's like you kiss the canvas with your paint. Just kiss your canvas with your paint. So this is how I started. I started using cardstock to get a feel for my dotting. One thing about that, you haven't put a lot of money in it if you're using cardstock. You can work your way up from cardstock to canvases or stones. And it may not be completely perfect, but I'm not a machine, I'm a person. And I think a little imperfection is okay. Okay, I'm going to use a different color. I'm going to mix up some of these colors here. I've let some of these colors dry out, so I'm really going to have to refresh it with the pouring medium. You want your paint to be the consistency of thin yogurt. So I'm going to use another size. I'm going to use this yellow. I'm going to go all the way around and put my dots in between the last dots. And you're doing a lot of eyeballing. As much as possible, you do a perpendicular to your mat, but it doesn't have to be completely perpendicular. I find myself doing it to the side a little bit. Okay, and you can see it's not perfect. My dotting, if you have dots that are not quite big enough or they're off a little bit, I'm off a little on whichever side, but this is okay. Okay, I'm going to use a larger little dotting utensil, and I'm going to put larger dots around. I'm going to put, I have these guidelines, so I'm going to put a dot there and there. And if it's not covering the way you want it to, you just go back and add a little more paint. All right, so I have those little larger dots. I'm going to go back to my smaller dotting utensil tool, and I'm going to do the white. This is called walking the dots. I'm going to put one large dot right here. Make sure you have enough paint on your utensil. I'm going to dot it up several times. Now, if I keep the same amount of paint and just go around, it will get less and less. That's called walking the dots. I'm going to put more paint right there and then walk around that dot, walking the dots. So walk around this dot. And don't be hard on yourself when you first start. This is something that should be soothing. If it's not perfect to begin with, that's okay. The more you do it, the better you'll get. And like I said, I sort of embrace my imperfection because I'm human. Walk the dots. Each dot gets progressively smaller because you have less paint on your tool. Turn it. And you just hug around that circle, the last dot that you did. I'm going to use a little larger, and I'm going to use a different color. I'm going to do purple again. So put a dot right where that top dot is, and then walk the dots around. And this takes some practice, walking the dots. Walk the dots until your dots become progressively smaller. And I didn't like those all that much, so I add a little bit to them. Walk the dots. If this makes you anxious, then this may not be the craft for you, but it soothes me so much. Okay. You can use all sorts of colors. You can make all sorts of designs. I look online for different ideas. And you can tell it's not perfect, but hopefully when it's all finished, it'll still be pretty. I'm going to use that same tool I had before. Dip it until you cover the tip. And you might want to put a couple of dots, and I'm going to walk the dots again. And I'm steadying my hand by positioning it with my finger like that. And then work your way around. If you don't like your dots, you can add a little more to them. And this teaches you patience too, because there's so much that you need to, you let things dry before you go to something else. Excuse me. I'm walking my dots. Going all the way around. All right, so I've gone all the way around. I'm going to do another row of white. I'm going to use the same tool. You could go a little bit larger if you wanted to. Tell you what, I'm going to put the larger dots on the outside. Then I'll use a little smaller utensil as I walk the dots. Okay. In between each color, you wipe off your utensil. Okay, I'm going to use okay, walking the dots. Putting white in really helps your colors to pop. So I have my larger dot, and I'm just walking the dots. To help with your spacing, you put your first dot in row with those larger dots, and then try to go in between the dots as much as possible. Walking the dots. All right, so I've gone around. Now I am going to make larger dots. I'm going to take one of these tools. Let's see, what color am I going to do? I'm going to use this blue again. So I'm getting a nice amount of paint on my tool, and in between each of these I'm going to put my dot. One thing that the pouring medium does is that it makes your paint self-leveling. Instead of having peaks on it, it'll smooth out. And you can make all sorts of designs. You just play with it. Use all sorts of colors. So I did these 6x6 for quite a while, and before I went to the full sheet, 12 by 12. And from there, I went to canvases. And then I branched out from canvases to stones. I got molds to make stones and trinket boxes, all kinds of fun things. What I'm going to do now is a swoosh. I'm going to do a swoosh. So I need two different tools. I need your smallest one and whatever size you want the tip of the swoosh to be. It's like a tail. So I'm going to use purple. So I've got my purple. I'm really getting the paint on my tool right there. I'm going to put a little puddle of paint. Then I'm going to use the smaller one to make a swoosh, just like that. So you make a puddle of paint and then you drag it to make the swoosh. You may need to put a couple And you can put some extra paint on your smaller tool too. So I'm going to sort of bring this around because I'm going to put a little dot right there. Puddle of paint, and then make your swoosh. Puddle of paint. There's some other terms that you need to know when you're working with your paint. How opaque or transparent it is. If it's opaque, then you can't see through it. Some paints, if you get a really cheap paint, it may be almost transparent and it doesn't cover it well. And there's some colors. There are sometimes when I'll get a paint and one color is more transparent, less opaque than the others. What you can do then is put just a tiny little bit of white paint in with that other paint, and that'll make it more opaque. It will also make it lighter, but if you just put a tiny bit, it'll be okay. And you see my swooshes are adding some dimension to this dotting piece that I'm making. And you can see my spacing is not perfect. It's far from perfect. But I still think it's coming out to be a pretty little piece. A puddle of paint and drag to make your swoosh. Okay, so that's where we are right now. So I'm going to put a little dot right there. I'm going to use some gold. The metallics are really pretty. So I'm going to put a little dot right there, all the way around in the middle of my swooshes. And I'm just making this up as I go. Okay, let's see, what am I going to do now? So I have this circle right here. Having a little black space gives it some dimension. So I'm going to, I kind of like that gold. I'm going to make a circle. And one thing when you're doing a circle, I find it easier if I put my dot on one side of the line instead of trying to straddle it. So I'm going around and around. I'm just trying to put it on one side of the line. You always load your tool in between each dot. If you don't have enough paint on that dot, you go back and put a little bit more. And then just kiss the canvas with your paint. Kind of cool to tell you different techniques. Just go around the circle. I may speed up this. I may not have you watch me put every single dot on here. In between each dot, I'm loading my tool. Okay, now I'm going to do something. I'm going to go around the outside and do rainbow colors. I do a color, and then I wipe off my dotting tool and do the next color. Trying to make them as uniform as possible. But if they're not completely uniform, that's okay, because once again, I'm human. I need to add some more pouring medium to the purple. Wiping off my tool in between. So now I'm going to do a technique using the walking the dots. This is going to give it some dimension. I'm going to go all the way around, walking the dots on a diagonal. Wiping my tool off in between each color. And if you don't like how your dot is, you can always put some extra paint on it. Walking the dots all the way around on a diagonal. This will give it some dimension. So here's our little mandala. We've made a circle. We've done walking the dots, going around that way, circles, walking the dots, swooshes. These are all the components of mandala dotting. The only other thing that I want to show you is top dotting. Now, I really should wait until they're a little more dry, but I'm going to try to do it anyway. These dots right here, I want to make them pop. I'm going to put little top dots, top dotting. Ideally, you would let your dots completely dry before you top dot so that the paint won't run into what's left. And that is our mandala.